All right, looks like we're recording. Before we begin, first and foremost, I want to say thank you for being here with me virtually and agreeing to share your experience and expertise in evaluation with our Master of Public Administration and Leadership students here at the John Glenn College of Public Affairs at The Ohio State University. As you may know, our MPAL program is specifically designed for students that are typically mid-career and up professionals. And the curriculum is designed to strengthen their ability to essentially lead their teams, organizations, and communities to a better world, right? For our data models and evaluation course, I'm preparing these short videos, conversations, maybe like 15 minutes or so, where we informally talk. I talk with professionals like yourself who have been involved in program evaluations and can offer unique insight into work done in this area. So thanks for being willing to take part. I'm looking forward to our chat today. I know a lot of our conversation might be applicable to folks outside of this course too. But to jump right in, could you just introduce yourself and your professional background?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today, Beck. I really appreciate it. My name is Dr. Jay Szkola. I have my PhD in criminology and criminal justice from John Jay College slash the Graduate Center in New York City. And I am a community crime prevention researcher and a social worker. And I have been an internal evaluator for about a decade and then transitioned out to being in the external role for the last 5 or so years. So I am very much at my heart a program person. I believe in spending time at the programs. I believe in being out there and really understanding the models that you're trying to evaluate or even research or look at in any capacity.
Okay. Do you think that the social work discipline or that background that you have plays an influence in your approach to program evaluation in any type of way?
Oh, it 100% does. I'm a researcher, but I am a social worker too. And for that reason, not for that reason, but for who I emphasize relationships a lot and relationship building,
Mm.
both with the programmatic staff, like the line staff running it, the administration of it, but the relationships in any type of this work is really important to me because I really think that they are the gateway to getting the truth from programs.
Okay. Awesome. Well, one piece that we definitely want to draw from, it sounds like a lot of experience there, will be your program evaluation experience, which is your bread and butter. And I'm wondering if you can describe one of the better process or impact evaluations or both that you've been involved with, and speak to some of the strengths or challenges and so forth.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about more of a process evaluation that I did back when I was an internal evaluator at Good Shepherd Services over in New York City. And at that juncture, we were setting up a cure violence replication model. And I was working with the program director, David Kaba, to get the program up and running. And during this time, I spent a lot of time out at the site to really understand what was going on. And that allowed me to ask the questions that need to be asked and allowed me to also understand the demands on the staff and what was going on in terms of what they're being asked to collect for data, what the infrastructure was, and how they were accomplishing that.
Mm.
And it led me to building a custom data system for them versus using the one that the city was recommending because it just wasn't functional for the staff. And this experience was great because I built a close relationships with the staff. I knew what was happening day in and day out. I knew what was going on with the program. And we were able to refine the instruments that we're using for data collection and even just to check on service delivery over time. They would literally come to me and say, like, Jay, this doesn't work. And it's like, okay, how do we change it to make it work for you? Because if it doesn't work for you, it's not going to work later on to interpret this data ever, right? Unless it's working for the staff, you're not going to get good data. It's that old axiom, garbage in, garbage out. So this was just such a great experience because of that in-depthness I got and the ability to really spend that time on the ground with them and see what was happening and clarify certain questions, right? Like my entire dissertation actually came out of this process evaluation, because one of the things that I discovered while being out at the program so much and hearing them talk about credible messengers and what that meant, and having hiring panels to identify it, and these different things they did to try to identify credibility in the workers, such as taking them on walks around the neighborhood to see who would call them out and things like that,
Hmm.
led me to understand that we didn't have a firm definition of credibility. And when they're at the heart of this model, that is a problem. So, but without spending that time there, I wouldn't have been able to pick up on that, because I wouldn't have heard the discussions that they had internally amongst themselves, not externally with anybody else, about their hiring decisions, what factors they were going into, and how these different factors were emphasized, and how there was one understanding from the administrative component back at their headquarters of what it was, and then there's another understanding on the ground with it. And that distinction was really, really important, because one aspect of it was that anyone from the neighborhood who had a criminal justice past could be a credible messenger. And my experience on the site and seeing them interview them clearly showed that this was not the case. And that's just one example of the knowledge I gained from spending that time on the ground on the site and really hearing those discussions, seeing what they're doing. Yeah, I'm a white guy. I couldn't go out in the neighborhood and participate in the activities in terms of violence interruptions or outreach work, doing that work, but hearing the conversations when they came back or before they go out in the mornings or the afternoons rather, like, was really helpful and insightful to understand this program and what was happening, and where they were being having fidelity with the model and where they weren't.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's rich information. If point of clarification, so is it that you were you were embedded in the program as an internal evaluator, or this was you stepping in from an external space?
No, this was an internal evaluator.
Nice.
So as part of their program evaluation and planning team.
Awesome, awesome. So I guess that also speaks to the importance of kind of having someone like you housed within an actual, organization, agency that had programs of these types. Um,
Yeah, I think that's really important.
hmm, hmm. So one thing I heard a lot of, one thing that stood out to me as well was data, the importance of data. So is it safe to kind of categorize you as someone who's more quantitative oriented,
I'm,
qualitative
def-
oriented?
I'm definitely more quantitatively oriented. I spend most of my days coding, building out analytic files. I try to label myself as a mixed methodologist because I really believe in qualitative data, especially in the beginning when you're doing any type of process work with a program or a site. You're not always going to have good, clean quantitative data
Right.
to start. A lot of it is going to be more experiential, more qualitative, more of what you're observing in that social milieu. And it's important to record that in a systematic way. So I am a big fan of qualitative data, but I do lean more towards the quantitative side.
Right. Right. That makes sense. That makes sense. One thing you're making me think of one point on that systematic data collection. Uh it's definitely important, whether it's quantitative or qualitative data, that there's still a system in place and how that's collected. And I heard you speak to some of the systems that you were learning about and helping with in terms of data entry. And I was wondering if you could speak more to the importance of that aspect of individuals who are, let's say, more line staff, or just more program oriented, being able to enter data in a way that's like, how should that look, and what relevance does it end up playing in the grand scheme?
It plays a lot of relevance in the grand scheme of thing. And how it should look is going to vary a little bit program by program, but there's definitely some principles that I try to put in place in terms of when I'm building out data collection systems. A lot of times staff are given mandates to collect X, Y, and Z, and it's a form just built someplace on a website or in an Excel sheet or just written records. But they're not really asked how this fits into their day-to-day activities. It's a task that's given to them.
Mm,
And from my own experience, when it's done in that capacity, you tend to get less rich data, and you tend to get more data that is sometimes less reflective of the reality of the day-to-day functioning of the program. They have forms, they're filling them out. They don't necessarily understand why they're filling them out, and it's not really built into the process of their day. It's just an added task that is for administrative purposes, is to put numbers in boxes to give to a funder so that they're happy and the money keeps coming, or to do research on the program. But unless the workers understand what's going on with it, you're not always getting the cleanest data or the most sound data.
Mm.
And I think a large part of what has to be done with data collection is you have to build it into the course of their normal day and make it useful for them. If they could use the data that they're putting in for their own purposes, you're going to get better data. And if you make it built into the course of their day, so they could either, if they're out and they need to do it on the street, they could do it on their phone, or if there's a way to do it in the morning, so it informs a morning meeting, right? Or they're able to enter notes in participant and then use those later on to inform their own work with that participant. Those are all types of data entry that are not just strictly for research purposes, but now has a purpose for the program too. And when you have that purpose, you get better data because the staff are now invested in that data entry process. They're not doing it just for you, an external person they don't understand. They're doing it because they're getting utility out of it too, and you have utility. And the best situation is when they're getting utility, you're getting utility, and they understand both of those utilities. So they have a use for it, you have use for it, you have that strong relationship where they want to use it. And the research then is also answering questions that they have. It's not just answering an esoteric question for ourselves, but it's directly informing programmatic operations too.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. It reminds me, I was telling you about the recent project that came in the uh Credible Messenger youth mentoring juvenile justice funding opportunity that recently came out from the National Institute of Justice, that's attached to a project that I'll be serving on in the new year. And in it, there's an element of it exactly as to what you described around designing survey instruments for these different sites where we're doing research, so these different programs. And with those programs, we're developing surveys so we can understand the program as a whole descriptively, but we're going to also set up those surveys where they can become something that those programs have tailored to their unique needs and day to day. And that throughout the project, and even when we're done, like we're no longer, funded to do this work, they still have that tool to use as a way to check benchmarks, how it ties up to their logic models and theories of change and so forth, and just program performance indicators over time. So it serves like a dual function in some ways where it's not just to extract information, you have something that's user-friendly that increases buy-in and hits all the points you just nailed in the last point you made.
Yeah, and it gives to the program then the ability to use the data for themselves, right? And it's an empowering experience. It's not just that it's going off someplace else, but now there's an internal purpose for it too. And they could really gain from that and gain a set of skills transfer too, that you could give them in interpreting some of that data and using it for their own purposes.
Right. This is good. This is good. And I know one of the things we didn't chat about, which we could talk about before we jump into this next question, is what is a credible messenger? I know one of the things you mentioned was in your work, it wasn't very clear. Folks were on the same page on what that is and the whole nine. Do we know today what that is? Just curious.
So we have some early indicators for what a credible messenger is. In terms of my own work in my dissertation, there's currently an article under review laying out a framework for credibility and criminal justice and behavior. So hopefully that'll be coming out in the new year. But for now, what we know is suggestive. It's based upon one study. It needs to be replicated, obviously. I'm going to put all those caveats out there. But we do have some indicators that clarify what a credible messenger really is. So previously, the understanding was that it was just someone who was from the neighborhood, had similar lived experience to the participants they were working with, and then they were reformed, right? They were no longer criminal justice involved. The similar lived experience was generally shorthand for former gang or criminal justice involvement.
Mm.
And what I found through my research is it's a little bit more than that. So I found support in interviews and quantitative survey for the workers being authentic. So really using their sense of self, not BSing the participants, not running from who they were or what they've done, but using that in a way that is helpful. It's not telling war stories, but it's being real with the participants.
Hmm.
Caring, actually caring, like authentically caring, if you will, in the
Okay.
sense that yeah, the job, they have hours, but they also get calls after hours. They get asked to show up in the middle of the night. They get asked like for a jacket, for food from McDonald's, for little stuff that shows care. There's lots of needs that the participants have, and the workers strongly felt that they needed to care to be credible to them.
Hmm.
It wasn't actually about being from the neighborhood. And that was supported in some of the interviews, but in the surveys it wasn't. What was supported though was that they needed to have strong relationships in that neighborhood and be respected in that neighborhood. They didn't have the relationships and respect. Even being from there wasn't enough. Those were the keys that were really driving it. I didn't find support for some of the stuff I thought that there would be, such as lived experience or race or culture, but I think that's also product of how I asked the question, and this work is still ongoing. So I think the definition is going to continue to be refined over the next couple of years.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks for giving us a preview into
Mm,
that. One thing that I definitely want to
mm.
do is when I do post this video, if I could link to some of your work, like your dissertation work, and in the future when that article comes out, you can embed that ad in here too for folks to take a look at.
That'd be great. Thank you.
And one of the cool things is we spoke with Dr. Quan Blunt Hill about pure violence in another one of these conversations. So for some of the students tuning in or folks tuning in, they can also refer to that video if they want more of an understanding of pure violence and so forth, and kind of mesh these two videos together. Um, so I do have a unique question for you. So everyone I'm speaking with, I have something tailored specifically for them. And the question I have for you is in evaluation or applied research more broadly, what are some of the challenges with being able to analyze data and being able to interpret it, understand the findings, the output when you run them in programs like Stata or any type of statistical packages?
I mean, so there's obviously just the challenges of interpreting any statistical model. You have to know the model, you have to understand it, you have to make sure that all the assumptions are met so you're not getting results that don't make any sense. And I think the hard part is that a lot of policymakers don't necessarily care about a regression coefficient or an incident rate ratio. You have to make it translational. So those models and everything we do have to be translated into what the real world impact is for it. And it's statistically significant is important, but it also has to be practically significant with that. And making those translations is really important. But even before the models and the data, I want to just go back. The most important part is spending time at the program so you understand the data, so you understand what you're getting. If your data collection isn't good, if you don't understand what the staff are doing, your results may not make sense. You may have garbage data. The
Mhm.
staff may have been putting in what they think you want it to see versus what they're actually doing. Or it just may have been that they're doing at the end of the day, you're getting very generic responses because it wasn't built in a way that was intuitive for them or helped them to facilitate an understanding of what they were entering data for or how they could use it. So that's the first thing. And I'm sure this isn't a surprise given what I've been hitting on in this conversation, but it's really spending that time so that you design good data collection instruments. You're getting good data input from the staff and you understand what that data represents. Do you mean the same thing by referral that the staff mean by referral? Do you mean the same thing by talking with the participant that they mean by it? You just have to have all those before you ever get to the analytical portion of it. And the analytical portion is really, really important because that's where our hypothesis testings are coming. Our hypothesis tests are coming in, right? And we're answering more of our research questions in a strict technical way. And I am a strong, strong believer in a lot of rigor. And then you have to translate those findings. So as a common policymaker or even person in a program or community member, it doesn't mean much.
Mm.
So you have to explain what that impact is and make sure that they understand it too, outside of just the coefficients or the specific point estimates that you produce.
Right. The one increase in the IV leads to this
Yep.
increase in the DV. Yep. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you. What's interesting, Jay, is uh um I think that's an evaluator's dream, like starting from the start, and being able to gather that information and have those clear outcomes and definitions and understandings at the start. Um, but we also know sometimes you run into situations where that data is already collected, and now we're
Mhm.
trying to now mesh it onto these different outcomes that we want to explore in our research study. But the initial design and data collection, like you pointed out, wasn't meant or set up for these outcomes and things that we now have interest around post hoc, you know?
Mhm.
So I think that's a very crucial point you brought up there. Um, you did touch into a point around uh, folks who consume these findings, us being able to kind of put it out there in a way where it's easy to understand and so forth. And I'm wondering, based off your experience, do you find that, let's say, agencies, other public stakeholders, um, uh, tend to be good consumers of research in that way? Just your general thoughts around
It
that.
depends. It depends. It depends who's there, what understanding they have of research, and how much they believe in evidence-based programming, right? Like we start now, it's almost in my mind going towards implementation science and closing that no-do gap with people, right? How much do they really believe in these evidence-based policies? Or are they more of an old school person who doesn't necessarily believe in that vein of the work that we're doing, right? They know what to do, they know how to do it, and it doesn't necessarily matter what the data shows. So I would say, like in my own experience, it varies widely. I have people that are very, very interested and they want to get into the nitty-gritty,
Mm.
and you have people where if it doesn't align with their priors, they're dismissive of it, right? So you have the full spectrum of it, and I think the biggest part of it is making it accessible, right? And making sure those findings are translated, and even too working with those people who don't necessarily aren't data oriented or don't want to incorporate, are slightly resistant, to help them increase either data literacy if that's the issue, or try to adjust some of those priors, right? Working with them to help them to understand it, because I believe strongly in evidence-based policies and practices, and the way we do them is with data. We show their effectiveness with data. And if we have decision makers who just aren't down with that, that's an impediment to this work. So it's important to engage in some relationship building, their education, and really try to understand why they hold these beliefs and they have this bias against data.
That's a big one, Jay. That's a big one. That professional judgment, especially in the criminal justice sector, I'm sure it's other sectors as well. A lot of our students are in other areas outside of CJ, but it's applicable there too. That you might have folks, like you said, who are stuck in their ways, their experiences, the way of doing things, and they want that to supersede whatever the data says. And because of that, they may not be receptive to what you're sharing out or what your results say, and no matter how you say it in some ways. That's very interesting. It also makes me think, hey, maybe we need a credible messenger who can get these different practitioners and folks in these with those perspectives to buy in and actually consume the research in a more meaningful way. That could probably be something
I
potentially.
think we do. I think we do. I think that's where like implementation science is getting at that, like a little bit with like these change agents, these people who are able to really bridge that gap and get agencies to uptake evidence-based policies. Like we don't fully understand the why yet, but listen, my money's on credible messengers.
Right, right. In some ways, it's interesting, not to go on a tangent too much, but it's almost like a lot of those approaches. I know in one video, we talk about participatory action research in some ways, but if you think about those steering committees or engaging practitioners, so if we're doing a study on policing, like engaging police officers, community members to have input on the design and all the work that you're doing in in some ways there could be some like trickle down effect where they become like credible messengers to other
Mhm.
folks when it's time to receive the findings and results from that study. I'm probably butchering the wording, but yeah,
No, I think you're hitting on something there, right? Like if like say for you or I, right? If we were doing policing work, like I don't have a background in policing. I don't believe you do. Yours is in corrections. And it's something that we would need to bring those people into the research design part, right? We don't have credibility with the population we're researching as researchers. We don't know the day-to-day challenges. We don't have that lived experience there. We have some of the other traits that demonstrate credibility, but we're missing some stuff. And it would be important, I think, to really bring in those practitioners to strengthen our own understanding and strengthen the instruments. And they would in turn become credible messengers for the project as long as we were authentic with them and cared what they said and incorporated that.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Um, so I do want to be respectful of your time. I have one more question here for you, which is pretty much a catch-all. And if there's anything, is there anything that you'd like to make note of in our remaining time around evaluation, research, in general that the students should know, the public should know?
Spend time with the programs you're researching. Don't be a researcher or an administrator who sits in office and never goes out there. It's more than just a site visit. It's spending time. It's building those relationships, seeing what they're doing, and being a resource for them and helping them, right? They may not have an understanding of it. You may not understand something there, but when you're able to bridge that gap, your work is going to be a lot richer. Your understanding is going to be richer. The questions you ask are going to be richer. And it's, in my opinion, you're going to get a better payback for everything for everybody involved with it.
Well, there you have it. Thank you, Dr. J. Szkola. We'll end on your voice. We appreciate your time and everything today.
Thank you, Beck.